Gabbard, who I like as a candidate, was roundly attacked early on in the process, almost as if the goal of the Democratic Party was to get Tulsi Gabbard out of the race and get her out of the race early. The last thing they wanted her is her on the debate stage having this straightforward conversation about the United States and the U.S. foreign policy and how that has detrimental effects to us. On the economic front, from the standpoint of you can't have nice things that other developed nations have, but also on this notion of terrorism. If we indeed care about this notion of terrorism, if we indeed don't necessarily want people hating our guts and trying to kill us, then maybe we need to pay attention to the foreign policy that we've been doing for the past 100 years that make people hate us. This regime change policies, as Tulsi Gabbard would say, has detrimental consequences, not just to those societies, but also blowback on the American population itself. You should listen to Osama bin Laden's reasons. Like, it's easy to castigate him, and yeah, fair enough. But when you look at his reasons, he actually did have reasons for it. Tulsi Gabbard's point is, look, we're doing things in the world. Why do we expect that the world won't necessarily do things back in response to the things that we're doing in the world? If you're killing a lot of people in a place with drone strikes, with bombings, you don't honestly believe those people will be indignant and outraged in the same way that you would be indignant and outraged if something similar happened to you? I mean, think of African Americans being shot by cops. What do you think the response is of those people being shot by cops? They're outraged. They should be outraged. And injustice has just taken place. Imagine this magnified to the degree of military where you're having thousands of people being wiped out with an American population that pretends as if it doesn't care, pretends as if it's not happening, and goes about its way, completely detached from the havoc that's being caused around the world. Do you realize under the Obama administration, we destroyed an entire country, just like we did under Bush? Obama did it in a different way, so it didn't necessarily get the headlines. I want Tulsi Gabbard on the debate stage, and they were doing a lot to try to get her out, and a lot of those things were smears. But not all of the critiques against Tulsi Gabbard were smears. Some of those critiques were born out of actual things that Tulsi Gabbard said. One of those things was regarding torture. Now, as somebody who actually likes Gabbard, mind you, Sanders is the horse that I'm riding, but I would not mind Gabbard being a Secretary of State or VP at all. I actually like her as a candidate. So I don't say anything on this video out of it necessarily malice, but more so on issues of accountability. There were things that Tulsi Gabbard said that I had extraordinarily qualms and problems with. Torture was one of those things. Now, she, on a video recently, actually a few days ago, Primo Nutmeg, I don't know who this group is, but they were fortunate enough to get an interview with Tulsi Gabbard. I have begged and pleaded for an interview with Tulsi Gabbard. I don't bite unless I am asked to, and usually that is by just my wife. I am an awesome person to have an interview with, and these questions that people have been asking Tulsi Gabbard, I don't think get to the heart of the foreign policy. But nevertheless, she hasn't accepted my invite, and I've sent it many times. But nevertheless, at the very least, people are asking her questions, in some cases, that I would ask, and this would be a question that I would ask. My problem with this is there was no follow-up. Tulsi Gabbard is a politician. Period. She may be taking a position on war now that allows her to be, no hedge. But that's a political strategy. She may believe it, but that is still a political strategy. She has to remain somewhat hard-nosed on that one because that's her path to the White House, if she has a path to the White House at all. But that doesn't necessarily mean from a political angle that she wouldn't change her positions like any other politician if she needs to get her out of the primaries. The question on torture is an interesting one because it's not one that people are just smearing her with. It's stuff that she actually said. This is her when asked about torture now. She strongly denounces it. Good. Part of my reason for saying I want to hear from her is because I wanted to hear her have longer and fuller conversations on these topics. This is one of those cases where the person at the very least asked her about this and gave her an opportunity to say something about it.
Again, another claim that I've heard, coming from the left against you is that you, quote unquote, support torture. What would you say to those people who would say that you are a supporter of torture?
It's completely false. And my record in Congress has shown my support for legislation that we've passed that has codified into law the prohibition and the ban that President Obama put in place banning torture. This is something that we have passed through the Armed Services Committee, through the Department of Defense, and something that I would continue to uphold as president.
That answer is unsatisfying to me, even though I appreciate her giving the answer. Let me explain what I mean. Torture was already against the law, even when George Bush was in office. He just changed the name to, what was it? Enhanced interrogation. It was torture. It was a political gimmick of changing the name in order to kind of avoid the technicalities of the law per se. So torture was never not against the law. I know this is a double negative, but you get my point. So her saying that, I codified in the law, it was already in the law. That question demanded a follow-up. Let me explain why I demanded a follow-up. Early on, Tulsi Gabbard, several years ago, January 2019, I guess it's not several years ago, I guess it's January 2019, she's in her interview and she's asked a question on the torture report. Now, to be fair to her, there may be leeway in this. Meaning there may be areas of this where she can say, look, that's not what I meant. But I wanted her to at least say, that's not what I meant. This is what I mean by follow-up. The smears on her for the torture stuff is coming from this very specific video. And so I wanted this very specific video addressed, not so much her just saying, yes, I'm against torture. Great, I'm glad you're against torture. It's against the law. It's been against the law. But what about this video where you said that there were this ticking clock scenario and all this other stuff? You're making right-wing arguments for torture report. Let's hear. Because I think this would explain why my point in this is follow this question up and ask very specifically, then what did you mean in this particular interview where you were bringing up the torture report?
Ask you in the end, as a soldier, how do you respond to the much discussed report on the CIA's use of torture and what some Americans have called a blot on American values? Do you share that opinion, or as a soldier, do you have a very different perspective on the use of torture?
Very bluntly, I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted on this report. There are, I think the jury is still out on the report itself. There have been comments that there are things missing or it was incomplete, and there are differing opinions on the report itself. But as I think about it myself, clearly we would not like to see any human, any person around the world being treated inhumanely. On the other side, I can also understand that any of us, if we're in a situation where our family or our community, our state or our country is in a place where, let's say in an hour, a nuclear bomb or an attack will go off unless this information is found. I believe that if I were the President of the United States, that I would do everything in my power to keep the American people safe. So this is an area that I have conflicting feelings on.
Although, of course,
this answer is problematic. Like initially, if she says I'm conflicted about the report, okay, you can stay there, but she, in her normal way, stepped into it and made the point that, look, if there's a ticking time bomb scenario, then, we got to do what you got to do, and I can break some knees. First, there are several people who deal with this that say it doesn't work. Second, those people tell you whatever they need to tell you to make the torture stop. It's like, this answer is problematic. I'm sorry. You could love Tulsi Gabbard, and I do like her, but this answer is problematic. And it deserved a follow-up. She's making a right-wing argument for why torture is okay. Look, it is one thing if you're president of the United States and you break the law in order to get something accomplished. Meaning, if this scenario happens, which I don't believe the scenario would happen, but there's a chance. There's, one chance out of some kind of billion number. But that's not something you do that's legal, if that makes sense. And that is not something that you go on TV saying that you'd be okay with if you were in that scenario. It's against the law. It's against the law for a reason. It's too easy to kind of slide into this notion of, okay, here's a scenario where I need to use it. Talk about a slippery slope. We tortured thousands. And you understand, many of the people that we tortured, Gina Haspel, the woman who's working for CIA right now, many of those people were innocent, entirely and completely innocent. This ticking bomb scenario, you understand that various levels of the intelligence services can come up with that too. Oh, there's a bomb that's going to go off that we suspect it's going to go off, and this guy has information. We need to get this guy information. We need to break some knees. We need to break some kneecaps. Many of those people were completely innocent. Innocent. We tortured people to death. I'm trying to get across. So this notion of her being conflicted about the torture report is problematic to me. And even if you're a Tulsi Gabbard supporter, you can be honest and say it's problematic. There's a certain thing called accountability that I kind of want, regardless of the candidate. If this was one Mr. Bernie Sanders or if this was Gabbard, I don't care who it is. I would ask the same follow-up question. What did you mean here? When you were in that video in January and you were asked this question about the torture report, what did you mean you were conflicted? What did you mean? That if there were a ticking time bomb scenario, that seems to be a right-wing argument. Has there been these ticking time bomb scenarios? And is this not a slippery slope that allows presidents, intelligence services, military? You can think of it down the line because everybody has their own personal drama that they're engaged in with regards to this. Meaning a military commander could be on the field in Iraq and make the same argument. Some CIA guy can be sitting in Thailand and make the same argument. And yeah, there may be a situation where the president is given this to make same. I guess I'm making the point to you that this is a slippery slope argument and is being used to justify the breaking and ripping apart of human beings. That is against our laws. I hope you understand what I mean. It is one thing if the president does something that is overtly illegal. It is another thing for Tulsi Gabbard to come out here and say, well, maybe sometimes you have to break some kneecaps. This demanded a follow-up. That's all. Look, I felt the same way between Cenk Uygur and Elizabeth Warren when they were having this kind of conversation, and there was this kind of love fest, and Cenk Uygur didn't follow up the question on something that was screaming to be followed up. It's aggravating. As somebody on the left, there are questions that we kind of want to get to, which means that you have to ask them. You can't necessarily be scared of the answer that these guys are going to give on some of these questions, especially if it's something that a large body of people want to know. This is a smear that they've been hitting her with from day one. Give her the opportunity to clear it up. Yes, her answer on this gets the opportunity to answer this, but this doesn't really get at the heart of what she said in regards to that document on torture, and that is the thing that they're using to hit her with. Are you on board for torture? No. Are you on board for enhanced interrogation? Oh, maybe. Wait a minute, what do you mean? What do you mean? That should have been followed up. That's my only point. But nevertheless, she's clarifying her position on torture. This is what she now goes with in regards to her answer if you ask her if she's on board for torture. But yeah, I am more curious about getting into words that would imply torture but are not the technical definition of torture, and whether or not she would be okay for that, and if not, when did it change? I don't think I'm being unfair to her on this. I don't think I'm being unfair at all.
Would say that you are a supporter of torture.
It's completely false. And my record in Congress has shown my support for legislation that we've passed that has codified into law the prohibition and the ban that President Obama put in place banning torture. This is something that we have passed through the Armed Services Committee, through the Department of Defense, and something that I would continue to uphold as president.
All right, you got to hear from her. Tulsi Gabbard comes out against torture. Donald Smead, great work. Oh, thank you, Donald Smead. I try. And I thought this was an important one. So, you know, I would love to have Tulsi on the channel where we can have a conversation about this very specific video. And look, part of my reasoning for not this kind of immediate throw out when I heard this was, look, this was a question that she was asked, but she may have a more thoughtful answer to this, when engaged on this. And so I was open to hearing her answer on it, and I still want to hear her answer on it. And yeah, love Tulsi, so do not misunderstand me. And she is my number 2 if we were talking about horses in the race. But, if I had Sanders sitting in front of me and I didn't ask Sanders something about the 2016 race, you think I was a hack. I would feel the same way about Tulsi. So I'll end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. I'll see you guys this evening. Thanks all.